So it's my great pleasure and honor to be chairing this second panel that we're having today. It's on European competitiveness in the digital age, how to succeed in the new world order. And here are so many eminent experts that I expect good answers and helpful answers. So let me start by introducing Dr. Roberto Viola. He's the Director General of DG Connect, so the Director General of the Communication, Networks, Content and Technology at the European Commission. Then we have Professor Jörg Rocholl. He is the President of the European School of Management and Technology in Berlin. We have Professor Timo Meinhardt. He is the Dr. Arend Oetker Chair. He holds the Dr. Arend Oetker Chair for Business Psychology and Leadership at the HHL Leipzig Graduate School of Management. And last but not least, we have Dr. Stefan Oschmann, the Chairman of the Executive Board and CEO of Merck. Okay, and without further ado, let me start right away, firing lots of questions. And I start with you, Dr. Viola. So, very simple question. How much money does the EU spend on digitization? How much money does it spend on agricultural policies? And do you think we get our priorities right?
The current figures are that for agricultural policy, more or less, it's 1/3 of the EU budget. And for digitization, we are around 3% of the budget.
So, what about the priorities then? Does this reflect our priorities, and what should we do?
Well, of course, this is the choice of democratic institutions, so we must respect it. The current structure of the European budget is basically dedicated to cohesion policy, so regional policy, and agricultural policy. Part of the cohesion policy is also about digital investments in networks and infrastructure, but it's a small part, roughly 10% of the regional policy. And then it comes the R&D part of the budget, which is, roughly speaking, today 17 billion euros. And out of the 17, some 10%, 12% is about digital. So it's about 10 billion. So in total, I mean, in the current budget, we have some 20 billion which are spent on digital technologies, digital networks, and investments. The next budget, we plan to increase it. That's our proposal. So, and we'll try to hit some 10% of the, little bit less than 10% of the budget.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the EU supports a lot of research on digitization, and we always hear that actually in terms of research, we are doing quite fine. We have lots of research articles. We even have lots of patents. If you think about AI, for instance, artificial intelligence, we're doing actually quite fine. But apparently the companies are not taking this up as much as we would like to see that. So my question for you, Dr. Oschmann, so what's holding European companies back? If you have to give the single most important reason, I know you can talk about this for a lengthy time, but give me the most important reason.
So we don't have European digital platforms. Mm-hmm. It's crystal clear. It's something that is something we just did not engage at the right point in time, and we have the dominant US digital platforms, and we had China that has created an ecospace for their own platforms to grow, and now we see that these two big camps are dividing up the world. If you look at the number of unicorns, for instance, if you look at German companies, among the unicorns, I think there's one single one, and that is about pizza delivery. Yeah? The European population is, let's say, we were talking about the elites and the so-called somewheres. So if we look at the majority of Europeans, they're actually not very concerned about that. Europeans care about equality, they care about migration, they care about climate. They don't care much about economic growth and technology. European companies are actually quite advanced in quite a few areas, but mostly in the business-to-business model. So if you have companies in machine tooling, etc., this is something that the average consumer doesn't realize, but we see a lot of progress of European companies. When it comes to the big digital platforms, we are nowhere. Okay. Mostly, from my point of view, most important is actually digitalization has to do with software entrepreneurs with ponytails and black t-shirts and flip-flops, yes, but it has a lot more to do with hardware, and this is also where Europe has dropped out, and we are in a significant danger of being an economic slave of these other two blocks if we don't get our act together and become a major player.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, a reason you sometimes also hear is that we are not able to make use of our market size. I mean, for digital products, you need a large market, so this is why startups thrive in the US or in China. So, Professor Rocholl, why are we not making use of the single market, which is our crown jewel, as Professor Felbermayr said before?
Yeah, we make use of it in many cases, and the single market, by and large, works well, but there are too many obstacles that still exist. In particular, I think we just saw this graph when we looked at the restrictions that come in when it comes to digital space, to services. And this really indeed prevents companies from scaling. And scaling is the prerequisite, the essential prerequisite for companies to grow, in particular in business models which are very dependent on the scaling. Simply look at Facebook. To have a critical mass of people coming in, so that simply you would like to have as many friends in one platform, and therefore the scaling is even more important than it is in the traditional industry, and in particular in a case where the marginal cost of having one more customer is basically zero. So this means the profitability of these companies is huge. So the, say, before-after tax return of profits in these companies is significantly higher than in others, simply because of the fact that there's no, I mean, the marginal cost is zero, and therefore scaling is so important. And we see so many examples in different industries. It comes from the financial industry, but also in many of the the digital industries, in which it's simply not possible to scale a business model as quickly and significantly as strongly as it should be. And this is why these digital platform providers in China, in the US, they come with a huge advantage when they actually enter European markets.
Now, could it also be an asset that we have these diverse markets with different languages? Then you think about DeepL, for instance, the startup company from Cologne, which provides translating services. Is that not a role model for making use of European diversity?
I think this is a good example, and I mean, language in that sense is a good part of diversity as many other things, but there are simple problems of, say, consumer protection or others where one has to get adjusted, one has to get through the bureaucracy of other countries to really get going.
Okay. So, Professor Meinhardt, we hear about the young people who embrace these new technologies much more than my generation would do. So they are no longer on Facebook, they're on Instagram. If you are still on Facebook, you're too old. So the young ones are on Instagram. So the question then is, does that not mean that we are well prepared because the young ones will manage all this, what we all elder ones are no longer managing? Is that a good sign?
Yes and no. At the same time, has a positive and a negative part. The positive part is, of course, is to say, embracing those new technologies, being pioneers. At the same time, what we also see, the more young people use social media, the less they are concerned with the common good. The more people are concerned with the common good, they see detrimental effects of digitalization. In other words, in our survey with 12,000 people in Germany, only recently published, we found that all, from Instagram to Amazon, from Google to Facebook, all digital pioneers are not as accepted in the general population as we might, I would call this an elite discussion, as you would like to see. In other words, we weaken our competitiveness, because this panel is about competitiveness in Europe, if we are not able to convince the people that digitization contributes to the common good. And there's a clear disconnect between common good concerns and digitization. I would go one step further even by saying the more detrimental effects of social media use we see, the less we have obligation, a kind of what Shelby calls reclaiming conversation, the more we have to invest in our old European thinking of liberal arts, of kind of human conduct, of dialogue. In other words, technology drives the need for more humanistic values. That's why, on the positive note, technology might drive it. At the negative note, currently, we see a disconnect between common good thinking and digitalization.
So when it comes to education, you would then propose not to have too much digitalization at school because that drives out the old values, the old cultural education? Or we should just have more of both, so longer hours in school? What's your suggestion?
I would echo what Professor Rüther said in the beginning of this afternoon. He said that our brain is not prepared. This might be true that at the end of the day, it's stupid, it's the human being. And the human brain decides what's digestible, what's feasible. Therefore, yes, maybe more of both sides. Not just more longer hours, but we have to redefine our educational system, or it sounds megalomanian, but at least to rethink how much knowledge in narrow sense, technology we want to convey in schools by using a tablet or something, and how much we want to invest what I call the artes liberales, the liberal arts part, or the values education. We have to heavily invest in the values education in order to maintain or even increase our competitiveness, because the other part is more than a little bit detrimental.
Now, talking about this social media brings me to privacy issues, the way how young people, and actually everyone who is using them, gives away data by simply using them. Now, the EU recently introduced the new data policy, the GDPR. Now, companies need to obey lots of rules when actually they use the data. Is that just another sign of the EU simply doing too much regulation, or could that actually be an asset? I mean, some American economists I've talked to say, well, that's actually great that you do that because now you define the rules and that helps us. You can increase data portability, all these kind of things. How do you as a EU person see that?
Before we plunge into the rules, I mean, let me comment on education.
Okay.
Because Professor Tamir talked about the educated poor. In Europe, we have now a sort of paradox. We have many people, young people, without a job, and many jobs without young people, especially in the south of Europe, where youth unemployment is more than 10%, and some in Spain, we are above 20%. We have 1 million vacancies in ICT, in data, in all the spectrum of digitization. So I think we have a human capital emergency. And I think it's a win-win, because more digital education means more jobs, means more people access to actually a good income. This is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, we need much more education on using social media. We are educated at school at critical thinking. We are educated at the idea that good history, bad history, history can be manipulated. I don't think it is in the mindset of people that social media can be manipulated. People can be manipulated through social media. So education and human capital are the emergency number one, in a way. Now I come to the rules.
Okay.
Many say the GDPR is the sort of gold standard for privacy in the world, and Europe is the rule maker when it comes to digital the world. In a way, it is true. It is true that I think we have the most sophisticated set of rules when it comes to protecting the individuals, their freedom, their data. Of course, there must be a balance. The balance is this cannot be turned into a digital bureaucracy. So we have to make sure that what we do is proportionate. That's why after 1 year of the application of the GDPR, now we are evaluating what are the effects. I think in general people are quite happy about the idea that their data are protected. But at the same time, we are a bit worried about the trend, because the bigger you are, the simpler it is to comply. The smaller you are, the costlier it is to comply. And this is something that we don't like to see, because at the end of the day, we don't want to see that the small entrepreneurs, the SMEs in Europe, are put at a disadvantage. So rules, yes, and GDPR is a great innovation in terms of privacy protection, but we'll be very attentive of what are the effects, especially on startups and SMEs. And the same applies to artificial intelligence, which is our next challenge in terms of rules.
I mean, politicians are now very concerned about the development. So Economics Minister Altmaier in Germany, together with his French colleague Le Maire, came up with this idea that we should have a new European industrial policy, that we should foster European champions. They are now joined by their Polish colleague. Is that the way to go forward, Dr. Oschmann? Do we need European champions?
Yeah, obviously we need European champions, but
do we need the policy to help them?
How do we get there? Personally, I'm very skeptical about industrial policy as such. I do believe, however, that there are a couple of exceptional areas. If you look at other countries, and we've been talking a lot about China, but it's equally interesting to talk about Korea or Taiwan. These countries clearly had industrial policies. They defined that they want to become leaders in the semiconductor area, in the biotech area. They have achieved that. Now, I was in a discussion with Henry Kissinger lately, and he was asked, what will the 21st century be, what will be remembered about Europe in the 21st century? And Henry Kissinger said, the Europeans will wake up and they will realize that they're a small peninsula on the Eurasian continent. The Europeans have been punching above their weight, and the only way how they could do that with all sorts of different consequences was to have leadership in technology. And I think there is a certain case to be made to select key technologies in which Europe should facilitate growth, not to protect players. I think that is the usual problem with the French type of.
I mean, he mentioned a few companies, old traditional German companies that
we need to create an ecosystem for new companies to grow and for other companies to cooperate. Dr. Viola was mentioning the semiconductor space. I think we need a European chip consortium that links AI, because there's a move away from software toward having the logic in the chip. If we don't do this, we'll be in trouble going forward. And the other area is biotech.
So you also mentioned the platforms, the B2B platforms, and there's a big discussion. That's also something that was our job to discuss in this commission for Wettbewerbsrecht 4.0. There's this discussion, do we need more cooperation? Should companies have an easier time to cooperate when it comes to sharing data for the B2B business? Is there...
I've seen in a totally different environment in biotechnology, medical research. I've seen the European Innovative Medicines Initiative, where companies cooperate in the pre-competitive space. Half of the funding comes from the EU, half of the funding comes from the companies. It works extremely well.
How would the economists see that?
Yeah, the question is, what type of data shall be shared? On the one hand, and this is now, I'd like to come back to the medical industry. If indeed it is possible to bring data together that would allow us to increase the statistical significance to, for example, detect certain types of diseases or to be better able to develop certain drugs against them, I think this would be certainly something to be welcome. At the same time, it's obvious that also one needs to be careful not to drive the availability of data too far. So when we think of social scoring or other mechanisms such as the one in China, where social sanctions can be imposed based on certain observations that can be made. So therefore, I would say it really depends on the purpose and what can be done with that. Where I really see a chance, and I think Dr. Oschmann mentioned this, while the B2C business Europe more or less has lost, in the B2B business there are significant chances when we think of machinery, investment goods, where lots of data can be collected and can also be used to inaugurate or to initiate new business opportunities. So this is maybe the focus we should put on, rather than looking at another, say, food and drinks platform. So really to think about what is the inherent, or say the important strengths that Europe, that Germany in particular, can bring to the table.
Coming back, Professor Meinhardt, to the privacy issue, do you think, or did your study show how young people are aware of the privacy issues, and do they care about them, or is that not on their mind at all?
The privacy paradox. On the one hand, they are very much concerned about their privacy. At the same time, they are prepared and willing to share data. And to explain this privacy paradox, there are several theories out there. One is saying that being part of this social community is more important than sacrificing data. Maybe they are not aware of long-term consequences, but this paradox is really a nut to be cracked in our research, why young people are so intelligent, are prepared to share at the same time. And obviously, it's a need to belong. It's a status question. It's an identity question. Being part of this WhatsApp community or not being excluded. In this regard, our social relationships change in terms of how technology allows for new types of interaction, at the same time discards other ones. And to me, this is the real challenge in digitization. It's not whether yes, we need technology champions, yes, we need. But we also need, this might be our European chance, new ideas how to reshape social relationships by being technology a means, not an end in itself. One could go even one step further. Digitalization these days, to me, sometimes is a means or a lever to shy away from other management failures. If 50-somethings start to wear sneakers in the board meeting, take off their ties, and play a post-proprietarian game again, might shy away, and they travel to Silicon Valley, come back and have new ideas. Let's face it, there are some economic basic rules which not necessarily will be solved by digitalization. At the same time, it can be used or even misused. This is my real fear, misused to shy away from management failures in other areas of finance, budgeting, whatever. Not just this mantra of digitalization should be considered these days.
Let me ask one final question to all of you. Do you think, I mean, we started out with the budget of the EU budget. So one way of increasing the EU budget would be to go for more military expenditure. I mean, that's something that we are asked to do, and that's something that is perhaps on the policy agenda, to have a joint European army. And in other countries, that actually is a quite boost to, can be a boost to innovation and digitization. Is that something that you see as an option? Would that be something that you would embrace? Quick answer, very short, everyone.
Well, quick answer is that working together more in defense, it's important. It's important to protect better our citizens and our assets, but there are other things we can do together. For instance, working to digitize healthcare, working for new AI algorithms that can beat cancer. This we can do. We must do, actually. We can improve our transport system. We can improve our prediction of how the climate will change and evolve. So there are many joint projects that we can do, including defense, but it's not only defense.
Okay, so Dr. Oschmann.
Europe must achieve strategic autonomy, and technology is a key means in that. I know three innovation ecosystems in the world that have high output where this works. It's the United States, it's China, and it's Israel. In all three, there's an early cooperation between the military, the intelligence community, academia, and private enterprise.
Professor Rocholl.
Well, with my modest experience of 1 year in obligatory military service, I would argue, and actually looking at the fact that we have more than 40 billion euros available as a military budget, I would say the level of options in improving efficiency, to put it mildly, are pretty significant. So what I mean by that, with 45 billion, it should be possible that at least one submarine is driving, or that at least there is a little bit more there. And my main point is the following. I would argue that obviously it's very important to increase the military ability, but I see a huge potential in increasing efficiency in these processes. And even before thinking about whether we need additional money, let's think about how this vast amount of money that we already have can be used in a way that, for example, Israel can manage with a much lower amount of money.
Mm-hmm. Professor Weinert, any suggestions from your
part? I can only agree with what Dr. Viola said and want to add one other aspect, which is, to me, we should invest more in Europe in what I would call pacemaking of humanity. Mm-hmm. We have an obligation to our cultural heritage, we have the capabilities maybe, and investing in pacemaking of humanity, to me, is a safeguard to avoid this loss of competitiveness, because otherwise, I would phrase it, culture eats digitization for breakfast. If you don't solve the cultural issue, digitization is something which might sooner disappear than we might wish.
And on this note, we conclude this round. So I don't think we have time for Q&A anymore. No, we go on straight to the next presentation. Thanks a lot to the panel.